Hey guys, if you've ever wondered what do teachers do on snow days, well, we sit at home and we think about school. I'm here in my fuzzy robe and I'm thinking about you guys and my warm house while it's snowing outside, and I'm thinking you're probably stressed about finals, and so I wanted to make you just a quick review video. I thought I'd just kind of talk through some of the major points throughout the semester, some of the major topics. So if you've forgotten some of the things and you're looking at the study guide and you're not sure what some of those topics are, I thought you could watch this and just get a refresher of the whole semester. So we'll just go through unit by unit. I'll try to make it quick and hit just the main points. Feel free to get your notebook out if you want to write some of this down, or if you want to have your study guide sitting right by you while you're watching this. If you want to go unit by unit and then pause it and then answer your study guide, that might be a really good way to review. Okay, so we start in the late 1800s with Westward Expansion. One of the things that you need to know is why people went west. Why did people move from the East Coast, and why did they move out into the plains and out west? And so there are several reasons. First, one that you were familiar with whenever you came to American history this year that you learned in the past was manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was that belief that it was Americans' fate to have the West, and so like that land was destined and given to them. There were several reasons that the government wanted and promoted people to go west. The government was actually giving away free land to get people to go out and settle in those regions. And so you actually need to know the difference between the Homestead Act and the Dawes Act, which were both similar government acts that had to do with land. The first one, the Homestead Act, I remember this one because I think, who's going to live on a homestead? A settler. And so this was directed at the American settlers. So the Homestead Act gave 160 acres to anyone who wanted to go out west and settle and stake a claim of 160 acres. If they lived there and cultivated the land for 5 years, it was theirs. And so if you think, who wants to live on a homestead? A settler. And that's who this was directed at. And this was one way the government was encouraging people to go settle out west. The Dawes Act, on the other hand, it is similar, but the Dawes Act was directed at Native Americans. The Dawes Act, it allotted land for Native people also in allotments of 160 acres. And it sounds similar in that way, but it was different. The purpose of the Dawes Act was to remove Native Americans from the land for the homesteaders. And so it was the idea that if we can move out the Native people and put them on little plots of land, even though 160 acres sounds like a lot, for Native people who are living on the land and don't settle, this is different. This is culturally different for them. And so the Dawes Act encouraged and forcibly put Native people into a lifestyle of living on a settled piece of land. And under the Dawes Act, these areas were not plots of land that were the best. That was reserved for the homesteaders. And so the Dawes Act was allotting land for Native people to live on in allotments of 160 acres per family. The homestead was allotting land for homesteaders or settlers to live on land out west. So the Transcontinental Railroad was another way that encouraged people to go west. This was that railroad that connected the East and the West. The two railroad companies were working from either side of the continent, really, and bridging that gap, the transcontinental. And whenever those two railroads met in the middle and formed this railroad that crossed the plains, it was even easier and more efficient for people to move west. And so that was the Transcontinental Railroad. As far as being on the plains, there were conflicts. There were battles between the Americans, whether it be settlers or whether it be the military and Native Americans. And so that led to conflicts. We learned about specifically the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Battle of Wounded Knee, but you just need to know that there were conflicts on the plains. This is going to lead to Native American assimilation, which is the Americanization of Native people. with the Battle of Wounded Knee and the final surrender of the Native people to the American government is going to start this process of trying to make the Native people more American. They're going to, with the Dawes Act, but also then with schools, Americanization schools, and the teaching of American culture and American ways, and Native people will assimilate in that fashion, and they'll be taught English and stripped a lot of the cultural items that they had, and so that was the assimilation of the Native people. All right, the Gilded Age, that's the next unit. Gilded means lined in gold, and so the idea was moving into this industrial age where there's all these advancements. It appears to be golden and gilded, but there's this underside. Industrialization is the rise of manufacturing industry. Factories and business are on the rise. We're going to see these very wealthy business owners of these industries like steel and oil become very powerful. You need to know the word robber baron. This was a name that was given to these really wealthy industry owners like Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller. A robber baron, that name is a negative term, and it's this idea that they were taking something as a robber. They were taking wealth from people, and they were a baron. They were very powerful, and so there were people that felt like whether it be their competitors that they ran out of business through developing monopolies, or whether it be their own employees that they paid really low wages. Some people looked at them as wealthy thieves, not that they were actually stealing money, but that they were having these business practices that stifled competition, that kept their employees in poverty. However, some people would say that they donated tons of money to charity, and they did, and some people would say, well, they're not robber barons because their contribution created this society that we have today, this industrialized society, and the oil and the steel and all of these contributions were such great contributions to our society. And so that there would be other people that would even say they weren't doing anything at the time that was considered illegal or wrong at that time period. And so you need to understand that a robber baron was this wealthy industry owner, and there is this two sides to it. During this time period, lots of immigrants are moving to the United States, and immigrants are coming in through Ellis Island and Angel Island, and they're filling factories and they're working, and some are moving over to California from across the Pacific, and they're participating in the gold rush. And so that is another aspect of this time period. Urbanization, people are moving into the cities where these factories are. Cities are becoming populated and even overpopulated, and this is going to lead to the progressive era because there are some issues of the Gilded Age that people are going to want to solve. So progressive means to move forward. And so after the Gilded Age, there are people who want to make changes, changing the issues of the Gilded Age. And so a reform is to trying to make a change. The people who wanted to do this were called muckrakers, and that means literally like pulling muck or things that are dirty in society and bringing them to light. So you're raking up all of this dirtiness of society so people can see it. And so these would have been journalists and photographers, people like Lewis Hine, who took pictures of the working conditions and child labor, or Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle about the working conditions of the meatpacking industry. And these people were trying to bring awareness. And so some of those issues of the Gilded Age were the working conditions that people were way overworked. They were working 6 to 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. They did not have benefits. Children were in the workforce. It was dangerous. Also, women did not have weren't seen as equal in the political realm either. Women did not have a voice and could not vote, and so the women's suffrage movement, suffrage means the right to vote, was a part of the progressive era. Some other issues, there wasn't any conservation. Deforestation was a problem. In the cities, there was crime and violence because of this massive influx to the cities, and that's going to lead to prohibition. So the progressive era will bring about reform to working conditions, will bring about the women's right to vote, child labor will end, Prohibition will start, where that is the ban on the sale and consumption of alcohol to try to prevent all of this crime and violence of the cities. And so that's the movement of the progressive era. All right, American imperialism is this movement of the United States to be a part of the global powers, like these European countries who are becoming very powerful, and the United States is going to want to take part in this movement to expand their territory, which is imperialism. Why would you imperialize? We have an acronym for that. It's empire. You would imperialize to strengthen your E, your economy, your M, your military, your P, your political power, your I, your ideas, or spread your ideals, R, to spread your religious beliefs, and the final E is to explore and find new resources. So I would say the two big ones that are really important are understanding that it does impact your economy. If you can continue to produce more and then sell in other markets and other areas and trade with other areas, that could be a really big factor in boosting your economy and strengthening your country. Your M, your military, this idea of more military power and militarism is also going to influence the First World War. The Spanish-American War is going to be the first conflict that we're going to see come out of this. The Spanish-American War, this was between the United States and Spain, but it didn't take place in the U.S. or in Spain. The United States fights on the Spanish territories of Cuba and the Philippines. We believe that this started for a number of different reasons. The USS Maine was traveling down to Cuba and exploded. People felt like the Spaniards probably did it. However, we're not really sure that that was what happened, but newspapers were writing about this, that the two-faced butchers paid by Spain sunk this USS Maine. And we call this exaggerated style of writing yellow journalism, and that was really fueling war fever in America, and so Americans were really set on fighting the Spaniards. Cuba is also 90 miles away from Florida, and so there's this possibility of wanting influence in Cuba. Eventually what's going to happen is Spain will surrender to the United States, and the United States will gain territories from it. The U.S. gains Guam, gains Puerto Rico, and purchases the Philippines. Cuba gets their independence. This is going to then lead to the Philippine-American War, though, because the Philippines are now going to come under rule of the Americans, and they wanted their independence, and so they will actually revolt from their new rulers, the Americans, and so that's what's going to lead to the Philippine-American War, the rebellion in the Philippines against the Americans. This turns out to be a really expensive war for the United States. Eventually the Philippines, the country does surrender to the United States, but it is a controversial war, and that there were Senate hearings afterwards conducted to find out if there were war crimes that the United States committed against the Filipinos. Two other aspects of American imperialism: the U.S. Got Alaska through purchase from the Russians, and Hawaii was kind of this diplomatic takeover, and so those are other areas that were gained through American imperialism. All right, the Great War, or the war in Europe, is going to become known as World War I. The United States does not get involved in World War I until the very end, and so it's primarily seen as this war in Europe. You need to know the four main causes, which are these tensions that are building up in Europe. M is militarism. The building up of military alliances are formed that cause tensions. Imperialism, this competition to expand your territory. And N is nationalism. And so you need to remember those are the four main causes. We would say that this likely would have only been a war between two countries, probably Austria-Hungary and Serbia, if not for this huge alliance system. A Serbian nationalist killed the heir to the throne in Austria-Hungary, and it likely might have just been a war between those two regions. However, this alliance system, this intricate alliance system, was created that likely fueled this. Okay, I'm looking at my time and I got 30 seconds left. It cuts off at 15 minutes, so I'm gonna make this quick. At home in the United States, the Great Migration was the mass movement of African Americans out of the South because the South was highly discriminatory. The North wasn't necessarily paradise, but it was a little bit better. There was still discrimination, but there could be, oh man, I'm not gonna make it. Watch part 2 for the next, okay?